Lord, thank you for this morning. Thank you for some beautiful weather. Thank you for all this rain that we've had, making just the land so green. And we thank you for this time of year. And as we dig into another tough passage again today, it was a little easier than last week, but we just pray that we get the big picture. And the one thing I just want to grasp on is that you are sovereign, and you are in control. And you are in control of history. And you know the details before they happen. So we thank you for who you are. We thank you for your power. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Okay, does anybody not have one of these sheets with them right now that I gave out early? You got one, Amy?
I do. Yep, I have. Thank you.
You guys got one? Or?
Which one is that?
This one here. This one's.
Yeah.
Oh.
Because I have them all in here, but I have several.
Good. Okay. So on these four views, as we keep going through different passages as we come along, as we're in Daniel, as we went through Matthew 24, we want to think about this in two ways. First off, this paper right here, all this is referring to is when Christ comes back in relation to the millennium, into the 1,000-year reign, and in two of the views according to the tribulation too. So if you look at the first one, what it's looking at is that second coming is coming before the millennium in the first view. The second view, the second coming is coming before the millennium. The third view, it's coming after the millennium. The fourth view, it says millennium, there's no millennium, but that millennium reign is in heaven right now, so in a sense it's coming at the end of the millennium when it's done. But so all this is, these four views, is thinking about in relation to Christ's return, in relation to the millennium. Then, when we go into passages, like we did with Matthew 24 and Daniel 7, I keep talking about past and future. Okay? There's some views that are very specific. We're going to use Daniel 7 for an example. Daniel 7, according to Daniel 7, these views believe in past. Post-tribulation, premillennial. So number one, they believe Daniel 7 happened in the past. And when I say past and future, I mean, I'm going to say from right now. Okay, from this minute. When I say past, it happened back then. And if I say future, it's going to be something that hasn't happened yet. Not just it's future from right now. Okay? So in Daniel 7, past, meaning you'll hear me say preterist, is just the Latin word, it means past. Okay? So Daniel 7, the first view sees Daniel 7 as all past. Already happened. The postmillennial view sees that as all past. The amillennial view sees Daniel 7 as past. Future hasn't happened yet. So from right now forward, Daniel 7, the second view, the pre-tribulation, premillennial view, sees that all as future. Okay? I shouldn't say all, because who remembers the beasts, and how many beasts were there in Daniel 7 from last week? Four. There's 4 beasts in Daniel 7. Those 4 beasts, everybody's in agreement that those are past. It's already happened. Because the 4 kingdoms, who remembers the 4 kingdoms? Who's the first one? Babylon. Who's the second one?
Medo-Persian.
Medo-Persian. Who's the third one? Greek. Who's the fourth?
Roman.
The Roman Empire. So then, those, in everybody's view on Daniel 7, they believe that those obviously happened in history. Okay? But then coming out of that Roman Empire was the 10 horns. That's the key in Daniel 7 when the switch flips for this view. And they say that there will be a revived Roman Empire. Okay? All the other views see Daniel 7 and say that's already happened. all past. Okay, so can we be clear on 7? So then, and then the other thing that was future with on Daniel 7, the 10 horns, and then arose a little horn that came out, and that little horn is future also. Okay. Now we're going to look at just a few views very quick just from last week on Daniel 7, and then we're going to go into Daniel 8, okay? And I'm going to look at my notes on this. Okay.
Ed,
Yes, sir.
the little horn comment,
Little horn, okay?
only the pre-trib number 2 say that's future.
Only, yes.
So the 10,
Now-
the 10 prongs or
Yeah, the 10 horns, and then what arises after that little horn is always future in that number 2. The other views sometimes can take that, which is where I would stand, and say that there was that little horn ties into 2 Thessalonians 2, Revelation 13, and Matthew 24 is all talking about this little horn. The abomination of desolation, that's all tied together. Most would agree that that's talking about that. Okay. I can't escape that 2 Thessalonians 2 still seems to be in the future. So I would say that that little horn hasn't been fulfilled ultimately in the last Antichrist, but is being fulfilled in Antiochus Epiphanes, which we're going to see in Daniel 8, in the Herods, in Nero. All these different things can be little horns that are happening, Antichrist, because John says there's already been Antichrist in 1 John. But it seems like there's going to be ultimately one at the end of the time that Christ is going to come back and destroy. Okay? So there can be some, like an anti-type, like, okay, this is happening, but it's ultimately going to be fulfilled in the end in one final Antichrist. Okay? So let's just look at a couple views. So in the futurist view, which I kind of already said, there's a revived Roman Empire, the 10 horns. That would be the European Union, 10 countries getting on board. There was, like I said, but last week, sometimes there's been in the 20s, sometimes there's less, whatever it is, but ultimately it's going to end in 10. 3 countries will rise up. The Antichrist will come out. And then we see that in Daniel 7, that times, and half a times is that great tribulation, that 3.5 years. And that would be the Antichrist that is going to rise up and will ultimately be destroyed. Okay, so that's the future. So there's multiple things we could hit on that tie to this Antichrist from each of those passages, but the only things I'm really going to hit on is the 3.5 years, what that makes in each view, okay? So a past or a preterist thinking from Daniel 7, that it's already fulfilled. So all 4 beasts, obviously, which everybody's in agreement on. The 10 horns could be the 10 provinces of the Roman Empire or possibly the Senate. Okay, because this 10 horns rise from the Roman Empire. So they wouldn't say the 10 is taken literally. Because you got to remember, this is apocalyptic type literature. The number 10, some say it has to be taken literally. Some will say, like in this view, this doesn't have to be taken literally. It doesn't have to be the 10. So the 10 horns rising up, if you think about Roman history, Rome was a republic at the time, from my understanding, and they had a senate. And then Julius Caesar came around and basically came into power, and that was wiped away. So Julius Caesar and the emperors are rising up. Those 10 are what's crushed the Senate, which is the 3 that rose up and it's taken away. Okay? The little horn would be the Caesars. And obviously, it's not just one, it's the Caesar. When Julius came into power, they would say, this is the start of the Caesars, this is the little horn. Now, the 3.5 years, they take this, that times, and half a times, is symbolic period of time. It's not a literal 3.5 years. It's just a symbolic period of time of tribulation. John Calvin believed this view. And there's more details that could be put in there, but hopefully that gives a little bit of a gist. There's what's called the historicist view. Most believe this in the Protestant view up to the 1800s. They believe that in the late 400s, the Roman Empire falls. It's divided into 10 empires. That's the 10 horns, the Roman Empire, because it was broken into 10. It was fragmented out. It was broken into 10 in the late 400s. So that's the 10 empires. The little horn emerges. That little horn is the papacy. And you see a lot of, even in the Westminster Confession, that the little horn, the Antichrist, is the Pope. Which, in some sense, is not wrong. Because we don't need to go into that, but well, we could, but there is issues. I mean, you have the Pope that says he's the substitute Christ, the vicar of Christ, here on earth. So in some sense, yeah, is the Antichrist. In most of the Reformation, that's what they believed. It was the papacy. So that's the little horn, not so much just one specific pope in power, but the whole power of the papacy. Okay? So times, and half a times, which is weird in this view, which I don't really understand, but they changed the days to years, which I'm not sure why they do that or if they think they can do that. It doesn't quite make sense, even in apocalyptic literature, in understanding the 42 months or the 1260 days or the times, and a half a times. It doesn't jive. But somehow they change it to years. So they say it's 1260 years. So from the time of the Antichrist, this would be around the 550s, they say the 1260 years takes you to the French Revolution, which during the French Revolution, after this time, the papacy lost its power.
Who's they again? Who are we talking about?
This historicist view. So it's still past. That's in the past thinking. All this stuff has happened because the 10 horns is the fragmented Roman Empire. The little horn is the papacy, which is still going out, but then ends at the end of the French Revolution when the papacy kind of lost its power. Which I honestly I don't know anything about that. Whether the papacy must have lost a lot of power at the end of the French Revolution. Okay, so that's another view.
But
There's-
they have that power back again in their own
They
following.
They do, and to a certain extent, from my understanding, but they don't have nearly the power that they had during that time frame. Between that 550, that 1260 years, the power the papacy had was extremely, and most of the persecution, my understanding, was from it was from Roman Catholicism. There was tons of persecution during that time towards Christians, so they definitely had a lot of power. Okay, so in the idealist view, the 10 horns, and this is still past stuff too, the 10 horns is the fragmented kingdoms that grow out of Rome. Rome was destroyed in the late 400s. This fragmented kingdom comes up, this empire, these 10 empires. This little horn is seen in two ways from this view. So this Antichrist that's coming up, this little horn, it's seen in a way of going, okay, it's fulfilled through history at specific times. So like in Daniel 8, we're going to look at Antiochus Epiphanes that rose up, the abomination of desolation that happened. They would say that was an Antichrist. And then they would say, in the future, there ultimately would be other Antichrists. The difference in this view, according to what I'm going to say in a second, is that they see the times, and half a times as a symbolic number that is a time between the first advent of Christ and the second advent of Christ. So I'm not quite sure how they do that, because if that times, and half a times is between the first advent of Christ, I don't know how you can say Antiochus Epiphanes was one of the Antichrists, because it's not within that interavant period. If that makes sense. So what I would say, you have these 4 kingdoms. If you remember from Daniel 2, how many kingdoms was there in Daniel 2? And in Daniel 7, does anybody remember?
Well, it says there's a, it talks about the beasts, the 4 beasts in
Yeah.
7.
Okay, 4 beasts,
talks
but how
about
many
beasts.
kingdoms were there?
There should be a 4th kingdom on earth.
5th. So if you look at, in Daniel 2, it talks about these 5 kingdoms. So in a sense, there's 4 kingdoms, and then there's this 5th kingdom, that's the eternal kingdom. Okay? We see, here, let's look. Daniel 2.
Ethan, are we talking about verse 23?
I don't know, I changed the page now.
Which, are you in?
Daniel 7?
Yep, okay, so we can look there real quick. Daniel 7.
But then if you get down towards the bottom, number 27, and the kingdom, the dominion, and the greatness of the kingdoms of the whole heaven. So is that referring to the next one?
So in verse 18, or 17, in Daniel 7, these 4 great beasts are 4 kings who shall arise out of the earth. So that's the 4 kingdoms, right? But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, forever, and ever. Flip to Daniel 2. You'll see in 31 where he starts to interpret the dream, and then you'll see in 38, he says, you are the head of gold, talking about Nebuchadnezzar, so that's Babylon. Another kingdom inferior will rise, and it goes through the 4. And then in verse 44, and in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. Okay, here's my thinking on this, is that you've got the 4 kingdoms. You have this 5th kingdom that has come. There's no gap between this time frame. So you have this problem. So, but this kingdom that has been eternal, that's forever and ever. That's where in Daniel 7, if you look at Daniel 7:13, I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like the Son of Man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. So this is the ascension in the enthronement of Christ. And now this kingdom, this 5th kingdom, is inaugurated. It's not consummated, it's inaugurated. It's started. Okay? So, there's no gap. You have all these 4 kingdoms, and then you have the 5th kingdom. And then this little horn that existed, I'm just going to go back to, I'm going to skip that. Okay, so then this little horn that comes up is throughout history. And I think when you see the times, and half a times, and when you see the 1260 days, and when you see the 42 months in Revelation, I think those are all antichrists, which then ultimately is going to be fulfilled in the last Antichrist. In that 3.5 years, when you see that, you see it literally almost in every one of those Antichrists. In Antiochus Epiphanes, he had a siege on Jerusalem for 3.5 years. You see it at the time of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD, 3.5 years. And so I think at some point you will see a time in the end of a 3.5 years that possibly could literally be 3.5 years. That could happen. Very possibly. Maybe not. It might be a symbolic time frame. But there is going to be an end, just like in these, each one of them. The tribulation ends, just like in the end, ultimately, Christ will return, and he will consummate his kingdom, and it's done.
Could you go back to chapter 7 and 13 again and just explain a little bit more? Are you saying that the ascension of Christ is when that kingdom began?
Yes.
After his death on earth?
Correct.
And,
Yep.
okay.
Yep.
So the 5th kingdom is active I mean, heaven was always there.
Right.
But the kingdom
And in
became-
some sense, it's like now Christ he lived, he died, he was buried, he rose from the grave, defeated death, and now his enthronement. Now he's enthroned until his enemies are a footstool for his feet.
Okay.
So
Say again, when did this kingdom begin?
this kingdom began at his enthronement.
Okay.
But you're saying, yeah.
I think I'm gonna differ with you a little
Okay.
bit in John 12 this morning.
Okay, well, no, yeah, good. So,
Just by a few days.
just by a few days?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, honey, we're in the fifth kingdom? Is that what
I
you're
would
saying?
say yes,
Okay.
right now.
Okay.
We're in the fifth kingdom.
Okay.
Because I don't see that there's a gap between that fourth and fifth kingdom.
Okay.
So it needed to be inaugurated, and I say that's why at the ascension of Christ, that's when that happened. Now, according to the futurist view, they would say no. Not that they wouldn't say that Christ isn't enthroned. I'm not going down that road, but they would say that Daniel 13 and 14 is actually talking about the second coming of Christ. That's how they see the rest of Daniel 7 as future. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
But the fifth kingdom, it seems like the first four kingdoms are earthly.
Correct. Which they are, definitely.
So then wouldn't we be in the fourth kingdom now time frame?
Well, in a sense, the Roman Empire isn't in power. That's why in the futurist view, there'd have to be a revived Roman Empire. So according to those four beasts, or those four kingdoms, yeah, we're not in that, per se. Certainly, we're still in an earthly, I don't know what you want to call it. We're still here. But in a sense, if you flip to Colossians 1:3 real quick, or 1:13. He has delivered us from the domain of darkness and transferred us to the kingdom of his beloved Son, in whom we have redemption for the forgiveness of sins. So in some sense, there is this tension that's already not yet, in a sense that when you believe, you are transformed, or you are taken from darkness into light into his kingdom of his beloved Son. But, like I said, that's at the inauguration. That's this already not yet, and then we always think of the end at the consummation. Well, it's like if you're in his kingdom, it's the consummation, it's done, and that's how we should see it. Well, we can't. Because it's no different than saying, and when you believed, you repented and trusted in Christ, you are holy, you are righteous, you are blameless. Well, you are, but you're not. You still sin. So there's this already not yet going through the whole Christian life, which sometimes can be challenging when we look at. Does that help?
Yes.
It does, okay.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so let's start to look at Daniel 8 then. What's great about this view, or this chapter, is everybody agrees on it. So there's no disagreement on it, really. So in the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me. Daniel, after that which appeared to me at the first. Okay, so we had two visions. If you remember, this is 2 years later, because it was in the first year, if you look at the beginning of chapter 7, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. Now this is the third year. And I saw in the vision, and when I saw, I was in Susa, the capital, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in the vision, and I was at the Ulai Canal. I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal. And it had two horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased and became great. Okay, so going back to Daniel 7, we saw the big picture. All four beasts 4 kingdoms, and the 5th eternal kingdom. The big picture of the whole thing. Now in this vision, it focuses on the 3rd beast, which we'll see, and the 4th, and the little horn of the 3rd beast. So now it drills down. And this is absolutely incredible, this prophecy here, that is fulfilled, the detail that is here. If liberal scholars want to they freak out about this passage. And the only way that they can deal with this passage, because they are going to sit and say, well, this prophecy was so fulfilled in specific detail that they have to say that Daniel was written later. And that's not true. But that's the only way they can get around it, because it's so detailed. So, who is the second beast from Daniel 7? The Medes and Persians, right? So he says, I saw in a vision, he says, and I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal, and had 2 horns. And both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. So this is the Medo-Persian Empire. The Persians were the stronger ones between the two. They weren't at first, from my understanding, and they actually, Cyrus defeated the Medes, and actually, Jordan's going to be looking at me going, you aren't saying your history, right? but then the Persians came into greater power. So that's the stronger horn. If you remember the beast from Daniel 7, it was the bear, and it was raised up on one side in verse 5. Same kind of thinking. So now you have this horn that's higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward, northward, southward. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased and became great. So the Medo-Persians went through, conquered Babylon, conquered the Babylonians, and this is the ram. So the Medo-Persians. And we're going to see when he interprets the vision, he says specifically later in this chapter, this is the Medes and the Persians. If you look in verse 30, as for the ram that you saw with the 2 horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. In 8.
There is only 30.
Oh, sorry, my eyes. It's 20. I need glasses, sorry. So, as for the ram that you saw with the 2 horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia, and the goat is the king of Greece. So as we go along, in verse 5, as I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes, so thinking power, concentrated power. He came to the ram with 2 horns, which I had seen standing on the banks of the canal, and he ran at him with a powerful wrath. So now you have the goat as the Greeks. And this is Alexander the Great. That comes up, rises up at a young age, like 21, he was in power, and he basically conquered the known world within a few years. I think it was the time he was 26. So he swiftly came in. We saw him as the leopard in Daniel 7 with wings, came in, took out the Medes and the Persians quickly. That is the goat. Verse 9. Out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the glorious land. And now you see this little horn, because remember in Daniel 7, that little horn came from what empire? What did the little horn come from in Daniel 7? Does anybody know? It was the 4th empire, the Roman Empire, right? And that was ultimately going to be the Antichrist. But now we see another little horn that's coming out of the 3rd empire, the Greeks.
You skipped a couple verses.
Can I also ask a question, moving back a little bit? So verse 8,
Okay.
the goat became incredibly great.
Okay.
But when he was strong, the great horn was broken. This is the goat's horn?
Then the goat became, is that the verse I skipped?
Seven, eight, excuse me.
7, okay, here, let's go back. I saw him come close to the ram, and he engaged against him and struck the ram and broke his 2 horns. So that's the 2 horns of the Medes and Persians, right?
But just to clarify, this is the goat broke the horns on the ram.
Yes.
Okay.
And the ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him. And there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. So, from Alexander the Great, no one was going to rescue the Medes and the Persians. He conquered. He came throughout and conquered the known world. Then the goat became exceedingly great. But when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and instead of it, there came up 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of the heavens. So now Alexander the Great died at a young age, like 30s, low 30s somewhere. There's a lot of debate about how he died, whether it was typhoid fever. Some say he got drunk and went out in the rain and ended up getting pneumonia and died. I don't know. There's all kinds of, some say he committed suicide. I'm not sure if there really is an answer to it, but he died at a young age. Then his empire was broken up given to his 4 generals, which we see very specific. Then the goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and instead of it, there came up 4 horns towards the 4 winds of heaven. So now these are the 4 generals with the power that his empire was broken up into. So specific of what happened in history. Okay, so out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, toward the east, and towards the glorious land, towards the land of Canaan. Now we're going to get into the specifics of this little horn. And this little horn, commentators pretty much agree on, this little horn was Antiochus IV. And you're going to hear it all kinds of different ways. John said it a different way than I did. Yes, how'd you say it? Antiochus. When you first said Antiochus, I thought, well, he's saying the wrong guy. But
Yeah, same to you.
Yeah. Antiochus, and then there was, what was the other one? I can't remember. I've heard it like 4 different ways from a lot of different people. But that's the same guy we're talking about. So Antiochus IV called himself Antiochus Epiphanes. I think I'm saying that right, which means great one or illustrious God. Or so he basically was, claiming to be God. That's who we're talking about right here. And this Antiochus Epiphanes went in, and that's where you see, like in the abomination of desolation, that's how Matthew 24 ties into these things from Daniel, which we're going to see in Daniel 9, this abomination of desolation, where he went into the temple and slaughtered a pig, got rid of the high priest, went into the holies of holies, basically desecrated the temple. All sacrificial worship was done. He went in and wouldn't allow the Jews to circumcise their children. There's multiple things that he did, okay? But when he first came in, when Antiochus Epiphanes arose up, from my understanding, is that he came in, and the Jews really at first started to compromise with him and do some things, and were like, do things that they shouldn't have compromised on. Well, then Antiochus Epiphanes left, went to Egypt, and tried to conquer Egypt, and the Jews heard rumors that he was dead. Well, before he left, he removed the high priest in the temple and put his own high priest in there, which was a major compromise already. But when he wasn't dead, he came back, and the Jews already replaced him back with their high priest, and that didn't make him very happy. And he was like, you know what? They've rebelled against me. So in a 3-day time period, he came in and wiped out like 40,000 Jews. And then this abomination of desolation happened, where he came in and he set up an altar. He actually set up supposedly a Greek god of Zeus on the altar in the temple. And you can read all this in the book of Maccabees, in 1st and 2nd Maccabees. Not inspired scripture, but there's historical things in there about this time of this period of the Maccabeans that is very helpful to understand Daniel 7, 8, and 9. And then it records the time of the Maccabeans where Judas Maccabean then revolted at the end of basically the 3 years. They revolted, they came up and basically in guerrilla warfare took out Antiochus Epiphanes, restored the temple back to sacrificial worship, restored circumcision, restored all these things back to the way it was. So let's keep going though.
And this would have been before Christ.
This was in like 167 BC. Okay? And that's when he reigned. And that's actually 167, I'm not sure exactly when he reigned, but 167, I believe, is when the abomination of desolation happened. Or 169, somewhere right in that time frame. Okay. So out of them came a little horn. So that's this Antiochus Epiphanes, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the glorious land. It grew great, even to the host of heaven. And some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. Remember, we're talking about apocalyptic literature here. It became great, even as great as the prince of the host. And the regular burnt offering was taken away from him. Just what I said happened. And the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. And a host will be given over to it together with the regular burnt offerings because of transgressions. And most would say because of transgressions is the transgressions that the Jews committed. That this compromise that they did. They let Antiochus come in and this compromise happened. And it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one who spoke, "For how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and host to the trampled underfoot?" So this is what Antiochus Epiphanes did. I mean, it's incredible prophecy that's been fulfilled, because this is a couple hundred years before this happened that Daniel wrote this. Okay? And then this all happens. And he says, "And he said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state." So 2,300 evenings and mornings. And they say this construction is odd on the evenings and mornings. Some say it's talking about 2,300 literal days, evening and morning. So it's talking about the complete day. Some say we're talking about the sacrificial system that's been taken away. So an evening sacrifice and a morning sacrifice. So now you've divided that in two, that 2,300, which takes it to about 3 years, because it's saying you're counting sacrifices, not days. So in each day, there's 2 sacrifices, what they're saying. So then that would take it to the 3 or 3.5 years in that time frame.
And how long did he?
However you want to take it, if you take the 2,300, the point is that there is going to be an end to it.
So that's not the time that guy reigned?
It was that time that that the sacrificial system, the abomination of desolation happened. The Jews weren't allowed to sacrifice. They weren't allowed to circumcise their children. They weren't allowed to worship.
So did this time frame match that time frame?
It does. Well,
History?
a little over 3 years. So if you do break it down to the 2,300 and say it's actual sacrifices, an evening and morning one, then it works. But then again, we're talking about apocalyptic literature, and it doesn't have to be specific. Okay? And the point would be that there's a time frame and it's going to end. So however you want to take it. Verse 15, "When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it. Behold, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of Ulai, and it called, Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, O son of man, that the vision is for the time of the end. Okay, so now this will be challenging. Some take eschatological time of the end. This is the ultimate time of the end. But this end doesn't have to be the time. The end has to be in the context. The end being the time at the end of this prophecy that's going to be fulfilled. And that end would be, I believe, here in verse 14, when he says the 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state.
So if we reach a point where everybody does not agree on.
No, they pretty much all agree on
They
this.
still do.
They still, this chapter, there's not
Even
a,
what the end is.
yeah, I think even on that, which a lot of times the futurist would say that the end always means the end. The end meaning Christ's return, you know. But here I believe they would say that this end is actually talking about this prophecy. So in 6:18, and when he had spoken to me, I fell into a deep sleep with my face to the ground. But he touched me and made me stand up. He said, I'm just going to read this through. Just listen to the accuracy of this prophecy. He said, behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. As for the ram that you saw with the two horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. And the goat is the king of Greece. And the great horn between his eyes is the first king. As for the horn that was broken, in place of which 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. And at the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face, who understands riddles shall arise. Now who's that? Antiochus, that is. Antiochus. His power shall be great, but not by his own power. And he shall cause fearful destruction and shall succeed in what he does, and destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand. And in his own mind he shall become great. And what did he do? Antiochus Epiphanes, he thought he was God. Without warning he shall destroy many. And he shall without warning shall destroy many. When they didn't think, they thought he was dead, he comes back and he wipes out 40,000 of them within 3 days. What verse was that, guys?
Halfway through 25.
Okay. Yeah, and in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many. And he shall even rise up against the prince of princes, and he shall be broken, but by no human hand. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that have been told is true. But seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. And get this last verse. And I, Daniel, was overcome and laid sick for some days. Then I rose and went about the king's business, but I was appalled by the vision and did not understand it. I just want to spend 1 minute on just that last verse for a second. Then I rose and went about the king's business. Here Daniel is going, he sees this prophecy. He sees these things that he knows somewhat about. Obviously Babylon, starting to understand the Medes and the Persians that are going to rise to power, but then doesn't understand these things that are going to happen. But what does he do? He rises and he went about the king's business. It reminded me right back to, let's flip to Matthew 24 for just 1 minute. In 24:44. Well, let's just go to 42. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Who then is the faithful and wise servant whom his master has set over his household to give them their food at the proper time? When we get wrapped up in sometimes end time eschatology, we can get wrapped up in all the details and thinking of what's going to happen. But what did Daniel do even after that? He got up and he did the king's business. Are we doing the king's business right now? Where is our focus on what we're doing? Are we wrapped up in all the things going, okay, I just got to know who the Antichrist is. I got to just understand all these details so I can figure this out. Or are we doing the king's business right now? What are the things that you're gifted to do right now? Are you doing them? Are we spreading the gospel? Are we doing the things that we just do every day? Are we going to our job? Are we living for the Lord in the things we do? Are we glorifying God through our work? Are we glorifying God through our relationships? All those things, that's the work right now that we should be doing. This is going to happen no matter what. These details are going to happen. God is sovereign. God's already laid this out. Look what he did in Daniel. He already laid that out, saying that was going to happen. We're not going to change it. It's what it is. We need to live for God right now.